Dr. Ben Bikman, a researcher in the field of insulin and metabolic health, begins by defining insulin resistance as a twofold problem. The first part relates to cells losing sensitivity to insulin, meaning insulin's signal to store or utilize nutrients becomes blunted. Think of insulin knocking on the cell's door, but some cells no longer answering as they once did. This diminished cellular response to insulin is the essence of insulin resistance. However, Ben emphasizes the often overlooked second part, hyperinsulinemia, where blood insulin levels become elevated as the pancreas compensates for this resistance. This twin issue explains why insulin resistance underlies a broad range of health problems, from obesity and cardiovascular disease to infertility, PCOS, and even cognitive decline such as Alzheimer's. Because insulin is effectively the master metabolic hormone, its failure ripples across multiple systems. Disrupted insulin signaling impairs fat cells' energy handling, deprives neurons of fuel, and even interferes with sex hormone balance. Thus, insulin resistance represents a foundational breakdown in metabolic health, which Dr. Bikman argues is the cornerstone of overall health and chronic disease risk. The magnitude of insulin resistance is startling, with nearly 88% of U.S. adults exhibiting at least one component of the metabolic syndrome, a cluster of conditions linked to insulin resistance. While obesity rates in America are high, the prevalence of type 2 diabetes, a clearer clinical marker of insulin resistance, is not the highest globally, with countries in Asia and the Middle East often exceeding these numbers. This underlines that insulin resistance is a worldwide epidemic spanning varied diets and lifestyles. Dr. Bikman categorizes insulin resistance's origins into fast and slow types. Fast insulin resistance develops rapidly, in mere hours or days, primarily due to chronically elevated insulin from excessive intake of refined carbohydrates and sugars. Eating patterns that provoke constant insulin spikes maintain insulin resistance. Conversely, slow insulin resistance evolves due to differences in fat cell biology, often influenced by genetics and ethnicity. For instance, some ethnic groups have a genetic predisposition toward producing fewer fat cells, leading to existing fat cells becoming overly large and insulin-resistant, compounding metabolic dysfunction. Delving deeper into these ethnic nuances, Dr. Bikman contrasts the fat-storing strategies seen in Caucasian versus South Asian populations. Caucasians typically have more smaller fat cells, which are metabolically healthier, less inflammatory, and more insulin-sensitive. South Asians, by contrast, have fewer but larger fat cells that become hypertrophic and dysfunctional, setting off inflammation and insulin resistance even at lower total body fat. This concept aligns with what Ben describes as the personal fat threshold, which varies across ethnicities and indicates how much fat an individual can store before metabolic complications emerge. Thus, two individuals with identical body mass indices, BMI, and similar fat amounts can have vastly different metabolic health profiles based on fat cell size and number. This explains why someone like Dr. Bikman might carry more fat yet remain metabolically healthy, whereas someone of South Asian descent might experience metabolic disease despite moderate obesity. Using an evolutionary lens, Dr. Bikman explores why these ethnic differences in fat storage might have emerged. He theorizes that geographic factors such as climate and sunlight exposure influenced adaptations. For example, ancestors of fair-skinned Northern Europeans needed more subcutaneous fat as insulation against cold and light for vitamin D synthesis. In contrast, people from equatorial regions faced less environmental pressure to store large fat reserves or develop insulation, so their bodies evolved smaller fat stores but different fat cell dynamics. Such evidence helps contextualize how adaptations that were once survival advantages can become liabilities in the modern world, where diet and physical activity patterns have changed drastically. These evolutionary explanations underscore the complexity of metabolic health and caution against one-size-fits-all approaches to diet and lifestyle based solely on surface-level measures like BMI. A major hurdle in managing insulin resistance is that clinicians rarely measure insulin levels, focusing predominantly on blood glucose tests. Dr. Bikman stresses that glucose is a late-stage marker. Insulin levels tend to rise and remain elevated for years before glucose abnormalities become apparent. This delay in diagnosis means many people live with undetected metabolic dysfunction for a decade or more. Additionally, traditional glucose markers fail to reveal the early onset of insulin resistance, which may manifest first as elevated insulin. Without knowing insulin levels, healthcare providers may prematurely prescribe medications that push insulin higher to control blood sugar, inadvertently worsening the underlying problem. Dr. Bikman advocates for earlier and more routine insulin testing to identify and intervene in insulin resistance before it leads to overt diabetes and other chronic diseases. Recognizing diagnostic limitations, Dr. Bikman points to dermatological markers accessible without blood tests. Specifically, he highlights two skin conditions strongly linked to insulin resistance: acanthosis nigricans and skin tags. Acanthosis nigricans appears as a darkened, thickened, and crinkly textured area around the neck or other folds, reflecting abnormal skin growth and pigmentation driven by hyperinsulinemia. Skin tags, small benign growths that look like tiny mushrooms of skin, commonly occur in similar locations. Both of these signs serve as accessible external signals that could prompt further metabolic evaluation and intervention. Importantly, these skin changes are reversible with improvement in insulin sensitivity, underscoring the opportunity for early corrective action. Despite the gravity of insulin resistance, Dr. Bikman imparts hopeful news. It is a reversible condition primarily driven by lifestyle factors. Central to this is adopting a low insulin lifestyle. This involves careful carbohydrate control, favoring whole fruits and vegetables over refined sugars and processed starches to minimize insulin spikes. By doing so, insulin levels can be brought down quickly, restoring insulin sensitivity. Structured fasting, even in the form of mini-fasts, creating 4-hour or longer gaps between meals, complements dietary carbohydrate control. Dr. Bikman suggests that adults should gradually regain the metabolic flexibility to fast for 24 hours, a capacity often lost in modern feeding patterns. When insulin levels drop, fat cells shrink, metabolic rate increases, and ketone production begins, making fat loss more effective and sustainable than mere calorie counting alone. Greater metabolic efficiency results from synergizing nutritional quality with meal timing. An intriguing part of the discussion centers on differences between men and women in metabolic function and fasting capacity. Women's fertility-related hormonal fluctuations, particularly the rise in progesterone after ovulation during the luteal phase, tend to increase insulin resistance and promote hunger. These cyclical dynamics mean women may find fasting more difficult in the second half of their menstrual cycle. Conversely, during the follicular phase, rising estrogen levels enhance fat burning and improve insulin sensitivity, making fasting easier. Dr. Bikman underscores that men's metabolism is more stable in comparison. This nuanced understanding is essential for tailoring fasting and dietary strategies sensitively, respecting endocrine rhythms unique to women. Dr. Bikman advocates a smart carb approach tailored to individual cultural and personal contexts rather than an absolute low-carb dogma. The quality and source of carbohydrates matter immensely. Choosing whole foods, especially carbohydrates grown above ground, such as leafy greens and most fruits, results in gentler insulin responses compared to refined starches found in many processed foods. He acknowledges the diversity in global diets, noting that some cultures with high carbohydrate intakes maintain excellent insulin sensitivity due to other lifestyle factors like physical activity, low stress, and good sleep. The emphasis, therefore, is on minimizing ultra-processed, packaged foods rather than demonizing carbohydrates wholesale. Respecting cultural variation enables more realistic and sustainable health interventions. Technology can empower individuals to understand their personal metabolic responses in real time. Continuous glucose monitors, CGMs, provide dynamic blood glucose readings throughout the day, revealing how specific foods impact glucose excursions and recovery. Although glucose remains a late marker compared to insulin, CGMs offer behavioral feedback that can motivate carbohydrate control and lifestyle adjustments by making invisible metabolic fluctuations visible. Complementing CGMs, devices like Lumen analyze breath composition to estimate fat versus carbohydrate burning. The ability to monitor ketones alongside breathing patterns signals when someone transitions into fat metabolism, helping optimize dietary timing and composition. Dr. Bikman sees these technologies as potent behavioral tools that bridge the gap between scientific knowledge and day-to-day application. Ketones, primarily beta-hydroxybutyrate, BHB, emerge as a critical metabolic marker and signaling molecule during fat-burning states. Dr. Bikman underscores that ketones are the brain's preferred fuel during fasting or carbohydrate restriction, disproving outdated ideas that glucose is always the primary brain fuel. Infants, born with abundant fat, enter ketosis rapidly to fuel their developing brains, highlighting ketones' evolutionary importance. Beyond energy supply, ketones exert beneficial signaling effects, reducing inflammation, enhancing mitochondrial efficiency, and improving cognitive function. Exogenous ketones, supplements providing BHB directly, represent a breakthrough by enabling some benefits of ketosis without stringent dietary restrictions. These supplements have found applications in elite sports performance, neurological disorders, and metabolic health, serving as a metabolic hack for diverse populations. Throughout the conversation, Dr. Bikman stresses that while core metabolic principles apply broadly, individual differences in fat distribution, genetics, sex hormones, and lifestyle influence the optimal strategy. For example, visceral fat is more responsive to adrenaline-driven fat burning induced by cold exposure and exercise, suggesting adjunct interventions like cold immersion could augment metabolic health. He also notes the importance of integrating stress management, sleep quality, and minimizing inflammation, as these factors heavily influence insulin resistance. Rather than one rigid protocol, a combination of carbohydrate quality control, strategic fasting, physical activity, and supportive lifestyle habits, tailored to personal circumstances, offers the best chance for sustainable metabolic health. In closing, Dr. Bikman encourages people to start with simple, impactful steps, such as modifying breakfast, either by skipping it or choosing lower carb, higher protein options to set a low insulin tone for the day. He emphasizes finding a motivating why beyond aesthetic goals, anchoring metabolic improvements in deeper aspirations for longevity and quality of life. Through accessible knowledge, empathy, and practical tools, insulin resistance can be confronted and reversed, paving the way for health, vitality, and disease prevention.